Hello, welcome to our next homework review video. This is going to focus on the tasks within the Pass NVR, written by Peter Francis, and this is looking at the 11 plus practice test pack 1 for non-verbal reasoning. Let's have a look at the homework overview just so we can be clear. So there are tasks obviously set on the CGP 11 plus online. We're hopeful that children are using those now, certainly the 10 to 11 questions, focusing on the vertical codes, the horizontal codes, then also looking at figures like the first two and like the first three. So hopefully you've had an opportunity to have a go at those. Please attempt at least a minimum of 3 each week on those, just so you're giving yourself the best opportunity to practice those questions online. But then of course you've got the supporting pack where you're going to be doing it on paper and going through these different sections. So we're going to be looking first of all at odd one out from the Pass NVR 11 plus non-verbal reasoning pack 1 and looking at practice test 1 section 1, and that's on pages 8 to 11, and then we'll move into the code questions that follow as well in test 1 and test 3. So let's have a look first of all at the odd one out. So in these questions, you have to work out which of the 5 options is the odd one out. Choose the one you think is most unlike the others and circle its letter beneath. The example here has been done for you. So obviously refer back to your mnemonic that you've been taught as well to think about shape, position, angle, number, size, shading, rotation, overlapping and symmetry, and you'll be guaranteed that one of those variables will be the one that you'll need to find the odd one out. So you can check those individually, and also grouping 4 shapes together to hopefully leave you with the one that is different is another way of approaching it as well. So looking at this example, we know that the answer is C, but how do we get there? Well, the idea is if you count up all of the lines, and the way we would encourage you to do that is just quickly mark them off. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and all of them have got 5 apart from C. So when we count up C, you'll see that we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines. So that makes that one the odd one out because all the others contain 5. Number is one of those variables sometimes people can forget, so make sure you don't forget to count things up. That can also relate to shapes inside other shapes where maybe you need to compare it maybe to the outside sides or something like that. Let's move on to the practice questions. These again have just been marked for you here. So we've got D as the answer. And the reason that D is the answer is if you look at the shading, D is the only one that has a dashed line around the outside. It is important to distinguish between dashed and dotted. So when we talk about dashed lines, we're talking about that kind of shading. But of course, when we have dotted lines, we'd be looking at that. So again, referring to this question, we're thinking more of dashed lines. And as you can see on D, around that triangle is dashed, whereas on all the other shapes, you've got a bold line or an unbroken line. Practice 2. The reason it's A is because within all the other shapes, you have 4 identical shapes inside. But you can see here on A, you've got 2 different types of shapes inside. Now, moving into the questions. So what we'd be hopeful now is that you've done all 15 questions, you've had a go at answering them, and what we're going to do now is go through them in turn and just talk about why the answers are the right answers. What we've also captured here are the answer explanations. Again, if you're not quite sure and you want to read it in your own time, you can. What you can also do with these videos, of course, is sort of fast forward to any questions you found more difficult, and hopefully then I'll be able to explain it to you. So looking at question 1, the answer is A, and the reason being it has nothing to do with the shape inside. That's really very much a distractor. It's just about the number of sides on the outside. So we've got 6 on this one, but if you count up all of the other sides on all the other options, they will add up to 5. So the answer has to be A. Question 2, we're looking here at the shields and the shadings, and what we'll notice here is inside the shield, the shading of the smaller shape inside needs to correspond with the shading on the rectangle on the outside. So if you look at A, you can see that you've got these vertical lines going down here, and that's also got vertical lines going down there. Dotted and dotted, horizontal lines, a bold fill and a bold fill. But E, and it's only a subtle difference, but the hatching inside, or the striped lines, do go in a different direction. So you've got them going diagonally from right to left, and then left to right. Question 3, the answer is B, and this is a rotation question, and A, C, D and E are all the same shape, so if you rotate them they'd all fit on top of each other, but whereas B has actually been flipped, so that's why that one would be the odd one out. Question 4, the answer is E, because on all the others the lines join up with the corners, or the vertices of the squares. So you can see here going from corner to corner to corner to corner, vertex to vertex, vertex to vertex, whereas on this one they're joining up to the edges or the sides. Let's have a look at question 5. The small rectangle that you can see here on each of the figures does need to be directly opposite the crossbar on the thick line. So this line here needs to be next to the rectangle. Here I'm just drawing it just to show you, and the same on all the others, apart from, if we go and have a look in a moment, I'll just draw it so you can see. So that's what we're looking for, that relationship between the rectangle and that crossbar. You can see C here, you've got the rectangle over here, but then you've got the crossbar on the other side. So the answer to that one should be C. I'll just highlight that so you can see. And let's move on now to question 6. Now, question 6 really will test your rotational skills, but the halved striped shading in the arrow, so you can see they've all contain an arrow, and half of which has been shaded. The shading needs to go in the same direction. And it does on all of them apart from D. And I thought it was worth showing you here. This, I've got a snippet of D here. If you actually rotate it around, so you've got the arrow pointing in the same direction, if you like, as C, you can see if I put it up there, you can see that the shading doesn't quite go in the same direction. So the answer to this one needs to be D. Question 7, maybe a little bit more straightforward. We are looking at the order of the shaded circles, and the fills of the small circles are all the same except B, where there is a plus fill, so say a very subtle difference, instead of a cross fill. And if you look at these ones, they all contain a cross fill rather than a plus fill. So again, looking at that fine detail, sometimes these differences can be quite subtle, so look really, really carefully at what you're doing. Question 8, the answer is A, because in each option, the largest part of the circle is shaded, except in A, where it's the smallest part. So hopefully you can see here, look that these are quite large parts of the figures. They've been hatched and shaded, the bigger part of the circle, whereas on this part here, you can see that's the smaller part. Question 9, the answer is B, because in each figure the V shape has a white dot at the end and a black dot at the end of the short bar crossing it. So in B, this is opposite. So again, hopefully that makes sense. Moving on then to question 10. The answer here is E, because in all the bigger shapes they all have a curved edge, whereas if you look at E, you'll notice that this is a straight edge going down there, whereas on all the others, if we were to follow the bigger shape round, always got a curved edge, as you can see. It's quite useful, isn't it, to have the highlighter just to show you the curved edge and the curved edge on this sort of bean shape at the end, but E is the answer. Moving on now to question 11. Now this one I did have to look at quite carefully, so hopefully you can follow the explanation here. So each 5-sided figure is divided into 2 triangles and 1 quadrilateral. So just to point that out. So in this one we've got a triangle here, look, then we've got another triangle here, and then the other shape that we've got is actually a quadrilateral. Okay, and that's the same on all of them, apart from in D, the quadrilateral created by the internal side touching two corners of the five-sided shape. So, as you can see here on D, this is the quadrilateral, and we've got two of its corners touching the edge. On all the others, that doesn't happen. So you can see here, look, you've got it going to the middle, going to the middle edge there, going to the middle edge internally, and the same on A. So the answer to that one is D. And again, I did have to look at that quite carefully. If you're still a little bit unsure, just read that explanation. It's quite clear, I think, there that all the others touch one corner and part way along the side of one of the triangles. Whereas in D, you can see that the quadrilateral corners, there's two of them that go to the edge. Question 12, the answer to this one is E. And the reason that it's E is because on all the others, where you have a triangle, it's going to be opposite the white part of the circle. And then when you have the black part, it should be opposite the rectangle. Whereas on E, you can see you've got the white part of the circle opposite the white rectangle, whereas it should be really the other way around, in the sense of having the black part of the circle opposite the rectangle. So in that one, we're kind of putting two figures together and another two figures together to leave us with the odd one out. Question 13, quite straightforward. Each figure, apart from A, has one line of symmetry. So if we were to run a line through there, run a line down through there, you can see that these have a line of symmetry running down through here, whereas on A, there isn't a line of symmetry. So symmetry is quite a good one, and certainly with some of these questions, you're more than welcome to maybe even cut them out. Cut out the shapes, fold them up, see exactly what happens when you do fold them in half. You should have identical sides. Now moving on to question 14. The way that this has been divided up, and it certainly says this in the answer, this is referred to as quadrants. So we have 4 separate quadrants, and the small square, so the little square here, should be diagonally opposite the triangle. Okay, and if you have a look at all the others, apart from C, where you have the small square and they're not diagonally opposite. So that's the reason that C is the answer, whereas all the others have a diagonally, the small square of the triangle should be diagonally opposite in the quadrant. And the final question here, the answer is B. And the reason it's B is because on all the others, the shape that goes around the outside is half of the actual shape. So if you've got a circle, this sort of curved shape here is exactly half here, half of that hexagon, half of that pentagon there, but when you come to the triangle, that's not exactly half. Okay, let's move on to the next bit. Moving on now to the next section, still within the same pack, the Pass NVR by Peter Francis, the non-verbal reasoning pack 1. So just a reminder of the task that we're going to look at next. So we've obviously just looked at the odd ones out. We're now going to focus on the codes from practice test 1 section 2, pages 12 to 15. Then we're going to look at practice test 3 section 1, pages 36 to 39. So obviously quite a few questions in these sections, so we're going to go straight into it and start talking about the approaches and how we do these questions. So section 2, I'm going to firstly look at the horizontal codes, and just looking at this example and just to explain exactly how you approach these. Firstly, it's worth looking along the rows to see where the letters are similar. We usually start on the top row, so you can see here we've got 2 R's, and you always then sort of ask yourself the question, what is similar about those figures? And as you can see, they're both circles. We then have our test shape. Here's our test shape. We've got to work out the code for this test shape. And you can see that we don't have a circle, we've got a triangle. So we look at the letter along the top that represents the triangle, and of course it's a T. Sometimes it's nice just to write that letter in there. And you can actually cross out the ones that are not T's. And that leaves us then with two possible answer options. And then we look along the bottom row, and the bottom row will stand for something different compared to the top row. So we can see we've got two Y's, and we're looking now at the shading. So the black bold fill, if you like, is the Y, the Z is the blank shape, and then the hatch shape is the X. We actually need the hatched, so we know we need an X, therefore it's A. So let's go straight into the questions and have a look at question 16. Now what we do have on the side are the answer explanations as well, so you can follow that, but we'll just talk through each question exactly how we need to do it. So looking along the top row, you can see we've got two Y's, and this stands for the centre shape. So this shape here, this sort of bow tie shape, we've got as Y. We can then look at our own middle shape for our test shape and see that we require an X. So the first row is an X, and let's have a look along the bottom. We've got two F's, and this stands for the shading of the lower shape. So we've got two bold, we've got a plain for G, and then hatched is H. We actually need the H because our shape at the bottom, our bow tie shape, is hatched. So the answer is XH. Moving on then to question 17. P, Q, R, S are all different, and that's to do with the orientation of the L shape. We actually need a Q because you can see that our L shape is facing that way. So that's why we need a Q. And then looking along the bottom line, this is the number of small rectangles. So F represents 2, G is 1, H is 3, and F is 2. So we need 3, so we know we need an H. So just as we previously talked about, again, what you can do once you've worked out the first letter is actually cross out the answer options that don't require a Q, and then that just leaves you with 2 and sort of gives you more of a better chance of getting it right, more like a 50-50 chance. Question 18. L, M and N, so what do they represent? Well, that's the number of sides of the large shape. So we've got 4, 3, 5 and 3. Ours require 4, so we know we need an L at the top. So again, we could cross out the ones that weren't L's. And then we can have a look at the bottom, and I think we'll refer to the two R's, and this is to the outer line style. So we've got dashed for R, T is a bold line, that's actually the one that we need, and then the S is a fainter line but still without any break in it on the outside. So the code required for 18 is LT. Moving on then to question 19. The top row is all about the inner shape, and again they're all different, but we need a triangle, therefore we need an R, so we can eliminate the ones that are not R's. And then L, M and N. Now the M's stand for the outer line, the dash line. N is bold, L is the fainter bold line around the outside, and therefore what do we need? We need an L. So RL. Question 20. X, Y and Z along the top, that stands for the number of circles. Now what's quite interesting I think with this question, it's something that often happens within these horizontal codes. Even though we're looking along the top row of letters, sometimes that can stand for things that are at the bottom of the figure and vice versa. So you may be looking at the bottom letters, but actually it stands for a shape or a figure at the top. So not to get confused, we will start with the top row, and we realise that we've got two X's, and that stands for 2. So I might even, you could even write the number above if you want to, if it helps you, just to keep track. We know we need 1 because we've got one circle here, therefore we need a Z at the top. So we can cross out all the others, and we're then just left with 2. It's either ZG or ZF. Now the two G's, what do they have in common? It's the number of bars. So they have 2 bars, and then H only has 1, whereas F has 3. How many do we need? We need 3 bars, so we need an F, so it's ZF. Moving on to question 21. J, K, L and M, so again all different because they are all different shapes. We require an L for our 5-sided shape here. Then if we look at the bottom row, we've got 2 S's, and that's the number of divisions to the large shape. So if you consider that the R has 3 parts, S has 2, and the T has 1, we need it to be 3 parts, therefore it's an R. And that's quite a commonality as well within horizontal codes, is to actually divide things up into sectors or sections or quadrants. So it's always worth just looking at that carefully to see how many parts that shape is made up of. 22, we've got F, G and H. And the F's, because they're the same, what do they have in common? It's the number and position of the rectangles. So again, if we have a look at what we require an H. So that'll be our first letter. Let's cross out the ones that are not H's. And then the bottom letters represent the fill of the small circle. And because ours is blank, it's going to represent Z. So the answer is HZ. Moving on now to question 23. We've got the answer as B already, so hopefully you've got it right. Let's just quickly work out why. The L, the M and the N, they stand for the shading of the central small circle, or small shape rather. So L is the black square, M is the cross and the square, L is the black circle, N is like a hexagon there inside. We need a circle, so we know we need an L. We can cross out all the ones that are not L. In actual fact, sorry, that's not quite correct. Let me have a look at that again. We were talking about the shape, but we should have been talking about the shading. So, sorry, we need a cross inside, just like this one. Apologies about that. So that will be M. And then the R, S and the T is how the large shape is divided. So we need it to be similar to R, because that's divided up into the same way. So MR is the answer. Question 24. W, X, Y and Z all different. Why? Because of the line style of the outer line of the triangle. So we're looking at this line here, this double line here, and then this bold line here. We actually need a double line, so we know we need the Y. And then we're going to then look at the number of circles. So we need 2, so it will be YM. And again, if you want to, you could just quickly jot down the number of circles if that helps you achieve the right answer. 25. Let's look carefully at this one. We've got 2 F's, a G and an H. What does the top letter stand for? It's the open-sided shape at the base. So again, this is this sort of alternative way of looking at it. So link the bottom shape with the top letter. So we're going to require a G as our top letter, and then the fill of the small upper circle. So if we think about ours as being blank, then we are going to require an R. So GR. Well done if you got that one right. 26, the answer is PN, and the top letter represents the shading of the small triangle. So again, if we just have a little look at the different types of shading, it's actually quite subtle. So they're all hatched, but we need it to be going vertically. So therefore we require a P as our top letter. And then the second letter is the position of the black triangle. So just looking carefully at where that triangle is positioned. Ours is here on the left hand side, and it's there, so we know we need an N. So often within these questions what you will have is a distractor, something that is there within the figure but it actually isn't useful in terms of representing the letters. So in this instance, the plain circle we really didn't focus on at all. It's all about the shading of the little triangle and then the black triangle in terms of its position. 27, let's have a look at this. P, Q and R along the top line, and that represents the shape style to the left. So we know that the style that we require is the R. If you look at the style we've got here, it matches with that style. And then the bottom letter is the number of shapes to the left. So we've got 4 here, 3 for G, another 4 for F, and then 2. We actually need 3, so it'll be RG. 28, the answer is E, and F, G and H is because of the size of the triangle. So we require an H. You can see that that size matches up with this size here. And then the bottom letter is the shading of the triangle. So therefore we need a Q because we need it to be hatched and actually going horizontally across. Number 29, this will test your eyesight a little bit. You've got RST and the number of shaded shapes. So R is 2, S is 3, T is 4 and R again is 2. We require 3, so it's the S along the top. And again, you can go back to your elimination if that helps you. And then looking at the bottom letter, we've got the style of 2 central small sided shapes. Therefore, we require the Z. So SZ is the answer there. So well done if you got that correct. So again, just looking, you've got your circle, your square, your triangle, your square. We needed the triangle, hence why it would be Z. Moving on then to question 30. This is the last one of this particular section. We've got L, M and N. This is the shape on the far right. So if we look at this shape here, hexagon is the L, the circle is the M, the square is the N, and the hexagon is the L. We need a circle, so we know we need an M at the top. And then looking along the bottom row, we've got PQR, and that is the shape of the base of the figure. So I'm going to do that in a slightly different colour. So we've got a square here, triangle and triangle, that's why they're both Qs, and a circle. We actually require the circle, therefore it's MR. Well done if you managed to get all 15 of those correct. Hopefully you've understood the answer explanations, and again, just by capturing those next to the question, you can always read those again if you're not sure. I'm going to move on now to the next section. This is section 1 of paper 3, and this is horizontal codes again. So we're going to go straight into it and spend some time talking about how to achieve the answers again, referring to that mnemonic, which I think is so important. So looking along the top row, we've got J, K, L, and this is the line style of the arrow. We require an L, and then if we look at the bottom letters, that's the direction of the arrow, so therefore it's R, LR. We're not that interested then in that little shape at all, again just a distractor. Question 2, we've got the position of the square, so where that square is positioned. We need it in the top left, hence why it's X. And then we're looking at the fill style of the square. So we've got crosses, we've got plus, cross and plane. We actually require a cross, so it will be XG. So this, just to point out, the shading of that square is the same as that square there. Quite a lot going on in that one, but again, hopefully quite easy to work out which ones it was not. So let's go to question 3 now. We've got RST is the shading of the rectangle. So again, we need it to be hatched, hence why it's R. And then if we look on the bottom row, it's the position of the circle. So our circle needs to be at the bottom there, so it's RZ. Question 4, the answer is E, and F, G and H is the bottom line style. We kind of need a sort of a wavy style. So just double checking. So the bottom line style, yeah, so first of all, it will be F, because the F represents the bottom. And then if we look at the bottom letters, that's the number of diamonds. So we need 1, so it will be F and an M. Question 5, we've got P, Q and R, and that's the number of circles. We only require 1, so we know it needs to be a Q. So we can eliminate all the ones that are not Qs. And then the bottom letter, the line style of 3 central lines. So we need that to be a W. Because if you look at these 3 lines here, they are the same style as these lines here. Moving on then to question 6. We've got F, G and H. That's the shading of the small central triangles. So therefore we require it to be an H. And then the P, Q, R and S is the shading of the small left base of the triangle. So we actually need a dot here. So therefore it will be HP. Question 7, the fill style of the square is important here. So we need to have a Z, because as you can see our square is blank. And then the bottom one is the position of the square. So as ours is at the bottom, we're going to need to match it up with this one here. Therefore it's an NZN. Question 8. The W, X, Y and Z is the orientation of the S shape. So therefore we need an X at the top. So just to explain, you've got this orientation of this S shape here. Needs to be the same. So we know that that stands for an X. And then along the bottom, the 2 G's is because of the number of circles. So we need 3, hence why it's an H. Number 9 is L, M and N, and they represent the number of arms. So we've got 4 here, 3, 4, and I guess you classify that as 1. We need 3, so we know we need an M at the top. And then the shading of the figure. So the shading needs to be hatched. That hatch shape there matches up with that shape, hence it's MR. Question 10, the answer here is D, and RSTS. So the S's represent the line style of the large shape. So we've got that bold outline. We actually need dashed, so a T is the top letter. And then F, G, F, H, we know that we require an H because this is the small inner shape and we need a square. So that means that it'll be TH. Question 11, we've got the answer as C. So FGH, the line style cross lines. So we can look here very carefully at these, where it says these cross lines. It's talking about these lines here in the figure. So we know that that first one, of course, is dashed. And we need a sort of a bold line, but not as thick bold as that. We need the H. We needed it to represent these lines here. And then the bottom one is the small shape at the bottom. We need a circle, so we would need the Q. Doesn't matter too much about the shading inside, it's actually just the shape which is important there. Question 12, the answer is B. The L, the M and the N represent the large shape, so we need an M at the top. And then the bottom letter represents the number of small circles, so we need 3 of those. hence why it is MR. Question 13, the Q, the R, the S and the T all different, and it's which quarter of the square is actually shaded. So again, we're looking at the square at the bottom here. So we know we need a G. So sorry, looking at the top letter, of course, it'll be an R. So the R represents this part of the square. This is where it can be a bit confusing because we're looking at the bottom shape for the top letter, but we know that that's the same, so hence why it's an R. And then we can look at the bottom letter as being the top shape, and it's the which quarter of the circle is shaded. So we've got this part here, this part here, hence why it's RH. A little bit confusing, that one, but we got there in the end. Question 14, the position of the circle represents the top letter. So we can see we need a T. So just to show you that circle there, it's in the same position. And then the line style to the far left is what we're looking at, and we've got that sort of wavy effect, hence why it's an N. Line styles are quite crucial, so knowing you can have zigzag lines, dashed lines, dotted lines, bold lines, to do try and learn those different styles. And the final question, X, Y and Z is the style of the arrowhead, so we need a Y. You can see this arrowhead here is the same as that arrowhead there. And then L, M and N is because of the line style of the stem. So we need it to be this sort of bold line, big thick bold line is going to be N. So YN is our answer, A. Well done everyone for listening to that video. I know there was quite a few questions to go through there, but hopefully you found it useful and hopefully you're understanding horizontal codes and of course odd one out as well. Thanks very much. Bye.